Hey, what's up, everybody? My name is Jeremy Schumacher. I am a licensed marriage and family therapist. It's Star Wars week, y'all. Happy Star Wars week. I'm recording very late this week on Revenge of the Fifth, which is what I personally choose to celebrate. Although all you Jedi-loving May the Fourthers would have already celebrated. I forget what the sixth is. Some other Sith joke. I've seen a meme that goes up to like the 10th of May for Star Wars week. So if y'all are celebrating, enjoy. I should probably do a YouTube video on like the cults in Star Wars. But this is Your Therapist Needs Therapy, a podcast about mental health and how all of us need help with our mental health, especially in these times of crumbling empire. Yeah, I don't want to talk about politics every week, but I don't talk about my clients on the podcast, right? That would be a gross conflict of interest and break their confidentiality, even if I didn't talk specifically about any of them. But some of them do listen. Hey, y'all. And I do talk about themes and things that come up, not just in my clients that I see currently, but, really since opening my own practice, coming up on 5 years. Nothing will make you feel old like that. Time's been weird since COVID, right? Probably is 5 years this week. I should probably celebrate. I'm ill prepared for that. Happy Star Wars week and 5th year anniversary of Wellness with Jer. But what comes up a lot in session, not always the main thing we talk about in session, but one of the things that even in just our little chit chat, and people are like, but Jeremy, how are you doing? Because my clients are lovely humans and do care about me too. Just the sense of existential dread, being aware that the empire is crumbling, being aware that we're not the good guys. We never were in history. America as empire, I don't know. I think throwing a boycott with the Boston Tea Party was the height of our good guyness. And after that, it's been a bunch of bad stuff. So that's not a well thought out thought. So history buffs, don't come at me about that. That's just off the cuff here because I didn't prep an intro, if you can't tell. But one of the things that's coming up in addition to the existential dread is just sort of this idea that we're really swimming upstream against a machine that doesn't care about reality. And that is taxing. That is tiring for our brains. We have a president who just yesterday went on a ramble, because of course he did, about what he thinks is an IQ test, but what is actually a cognitive functioning test for people who have Alzheimer's and dementia. So again, we have a president who's going on live television talking about his dementia test. Anybody who's sort of been tracking Trump's health knows he goes for a medication injection, which is why his hands are all janked up at the early part of the month, because he's getting dementia medication. And we're just supposed to ignore that. So we have a president who's talking about his dementia, who's in the Epstein files, who's grossly corrupt and enriching himself along with his family members, who's engaging in an illegal military action in Iran, whose Secretary of Defense is lying to Congress, perjuring himself in real time. We have an armed occupying police force, probably illegally as well, existing. We have the Supreme Court gutting the Voting Rights Act and saying that gerrymandering on racist grounds is legal as long as you can't prove it's just racism, which legally is a very high bar. And immediately the state that started Jim Crow brought it back and halted a primary. So, that's just this week. Like, that's a lot of stuff. There's several ongoing genocides across the world. There's climate change throughout all of this. And so, the question for this week that I wanted to tackle from a mental health perspective and normalize for the people who are struggling with it and talk a little bit about how I handle it, how I talk about it with my clients, how they can handle it, and how you, dear podcast listener, can also hopefully handle it. Does reality even matter anymore? And when you're dealing with fascism, with an authoritarian government that is employing a high degree of propaganda in unison with a capital class that has captured most of the wealth in the country and owns all of the media, it can feel really alienating to be like, yeah, but that's not true, right? RFK Jr. Talking about eliminating racism. And then a senator correctly asking him, yes, but we lead the world in maternal deaths of Black women. Shouldn't that demographic be studied more? Shouldn't that be a cause for concern? And he was just like, nah, we solved racism. And, that's infuriating. Maha is a good example of like, we're making America healthy again by getting rid of Red 40, which is a win. I won't fight against that. And then also taking payoffs from major polluters so that glyphosate, which is a carcinogen, can get put back into things and continue to kill our crops and make things less healthy for us. Like, it's Soviet level propaganda of like doublethink. And again, like, it's infuriating, right? I can go on and on and on and give example after example. Our president is a pedophile, the richest man in the world who is not an American citizen, did a bunch of illegal shit during the election. Even just like, I'm not even getting into like the religious stuff here of like Mike Johnson and Pete Hegseth and the New Apostolic Reform of Wilson. Y'all have heard me talk about that before. If you don't know who any of those people are, hey, welcome. Listen to some older episodes. I talk about that stuff a lot because religious trauma is one of my specialties. But religious trauma being one of my specialties does inform sort of where this cognitive dissonance goes. And that's a bit of a bummer because I will tell you, a lot of cults don't disband when their leader is proven to be a liar. A lot of religious movements are continually updated and changed when they're proven to be false. And so, yeah, we're going to start with like belief systems, right? And when it comes to propaganda, a lot of times people are performing belief, right? I don't think a lot of people in Trump's cabinet are as stupid as he is or are demented as he is. I just think they're wealthy assholes and they don't really care who gets hurt as long as they can be wealthy. So they perform the belief system, they perform the party line while not believing it. And again, we have historical examples of this. We certainly have it with the Soviet Union under Stalin. We have it in China with Mao. We have it with the Germans, Nazi Germany. We have it with Reagan, like at home. I'm not pretending to put America on a pedestal here. Like, we've been deeply propagandized as a country from the get-go. Manifest Destiny, all sorts of bullshit. But again, we have sort of these historic examples of not just cults, because the reason cults aren't necessarily a good example and won't make you feel better right now is because by and large, cults are pretty small. Now, if you want to talk about Catholicism or mainstream Christianity as a cult, we certainly can do that. I would refer to those things as cults. And those are a better example. So we have to look at like larger systems, bigger, almost more institutional propaganda and what happens there. Because I think it matters, spoiler alert for the end of the episode, but like, yes, reality does still matter. And the historical precedent is that reality does tend to win out. It just takes longer than we individual humans would like, because systemic change and institutional shifts and cultural shifts for a entire society take longer than generally, I wouldn't say a person's lifespan, but what our cognition can really process in a particular moment. Um, if you think about somebody who was a young person during the civil rights movements in the 1960s, they'd be in their 60s or 70s, more realistically, their 70s now, to see something that they fought so hard for get gutted by a bunch of bought and paid for corrupt racists from the Heritage Foundation who now sit on the Supreme Court. What a bummer. Yeah, I mean, like, that's just an actual bummer. And and the Supreme Court isn't dealing in reality. Bremerton's the case that I talk about the most, in which a high school football coach sued all the way to the Supreme Court that he lost his job as a football coach because he was inviting members of the football team to pray in what the Supreme Court ruled was a private moment of true faith, when he was demanding that his players would join him at the 50-yard line and very publicly participate in a public prayer. And the Supreme Court likes to pretend that not following a leader's preferred religion includes no backlash, which isn't true. But again, like, just their use of like a private moment when like there's just pictures like in the court documents of like this large gathering on the 50-yard line of a football field. It's not a private moment. The Supreme Court, since Citizens United, has just been openly corrupt and also like stopped caring about reality because they're getting paid, right? They made bribery legal as long as you wait 30 days. Like, they're not a serious bunch of people. So again, like, that's a good example. Again, going back to like the Bush administration and weapons of mass destruction, and also just like the opportunity to have had Al Gore as our president and do something about climate change, and instead to get W. Not great. And again, when we look at these things in these moments, it can be really, that's what our brain can focus on. Our brain can focus on moments. Our brain can only process so much information at a time. I am a neurodivergent human being. I also have studied and practiced systems thinking for a long time. So I tend to think between my ADHD and the systems that I learned a lot about, continue to study to this day, and practice on a daily basis, I can hold complex ideas in my head and am aware of, interested in, and even, intrigued by, get that dopamine hit from the way that things connect. But the human brain is limited in capacity for that, even with divergent brains that are practiced in it. We can only process so much information at a given time. And our brain is this vast supercomputer that likes to take shortcuts to conserve energy. And so our brain makes decisions on what it is dealing with and what it isn't dealing with. So when we want to be on sort of the doomerism run, we certainly can point out all these bad things, and that sort of ignores that society has progressed over time. Not in these specific ways, or there have been back and forths, because the reality of human lived experiences is complex and it is not easy to just summarize in a 30-second clip. But it's something that has progressed over time. Our ideas around a lot of things have shifted and changed, and will continue to do so into the future. And now, I'm not an old person. I mean, I'm a millennial, so I guess that's relative to how old you are when you're listening to this. But I'm not of that old 60s plus generation that's like, the young people will solve it. Like, fuck off, everybody, with that bullshit. You could have fixed it and you didn't. You're a bad person. You got to live with that. The ageism of that commentary does not bother me. And again, like, that's who in America is in charge, which is a huge part of the problem. We have too many old people running stuff without taking any accountability for how much stuff they've ruined for future generations, and then wanting to just pass the buck and say they'll solve it. They probably will, but like also a shit ton of preventable harm will be done in that time. That again, it would have been better to prevent that harm. We could have adopted renewable energy a long time ago, and we didn't, so that a handful of people could be wealthy. Um, this is veering doomerist, right? Like even when I'm trying to be optimistic and hopeful intentionally, it's hard to not be like shit sucks right now. I don't know if y'all have noticed, like, yes, things are expensive, but also like this was on Reddit the other day. I haven't seen research. I did go and look for it in the couple of academic libraries I have access to, which again is a flaw of science and research, is that to do it well does actually take time. Reddit is a little bit more instantaneous and far less scientifically accurate or rigorous, but just as sort of a perception of living is like, have y'all noticed that food is going lower in quality? Which, like, of course, we knew this would happen when Trump was elected. We knew this would happen when Robert RFK Jr. was put into charge. Like, they cut back a ton of customer safeguards. They don't care about regular people. They, again, care about bottom lines. They're bought and paid for. And so, yeah, like back in the day in like the early 1900s, Kellogg spent a ton of money seeing how much sawdust they could put in their cereal before people would notice change in the taste. Like corporations that are for profit will never make good decisions for their consumer base. And again, in its current time of total wealth inequality, that's never been truer, because you have people who aren't even concerned or connected to the company beyond shareholders who are making money off of it. So yeah, shit's getting more expensive and also like worse. Even just like buying ground beef recently, been like, this is lower quality than it used to be. Same brand, same stuff that I look for when I'm buying it, because I try and be a conscious purchaser. People can be all mad that I eat meat, but so have humans throughout all of history. That's cognitive dissonance on my part, because I love animals. Also like bacon. We'll get into the cognitive dissonance. It's coming. I'm building a point. Don't worry. Apparently, I need to rant for a little bit each week for my own sanity. The performative belief system is what we're talking about, right? And so again, like this is Bobby Kennedy Jr. to a T. I don't, this is JD Vance to a T. A bunch of people who spoke very ill of Trump now bend the knee and lick the boot so that they can hopefully take over power, which again, it's pretty unlikely to happen. I heard somebody talking about, I don't remember where it was. Maybe it was Robert Evans on, I don't know if it's Behind the Bastards. It could happen here, but like the White House Correspondents' Dinner, who got Secret Service to take them out of the ballroom and who didn't, is a tell, and it's a reminder for the people who are spending a shit ton of money to be close to power that they are not actually in power. And yeah, again, reality matters, right? In life and death moments, some of those things become clarified. But what happens in these other institutions, what happened in previous societies where propaganda was really high and cultural change took 20 to 40 years, right? Like it tends not to be an instantaneous thing outside of very specific instances. Again, I think COVID was like I was going to say mask off moment, but that wouldn't translate well. COVID showed how inept Trump and his cronies were. Again, just how racist America is and misogynistic is, then we elected him again because people are stupid. And again, I do feel not bad saying that, but I also hold a lot of space for people are woefully uninformed and purposefully misled in the American media culture of propaganda run amok when, you have Musk working for the government, ? however that happened. And you have Bezos and Zuckerberg and whoever else, Larry Ellison, sitting behind Trump at his inauguration. Like, that's not a good thing, when they own most of the media sphere. And again, like, this is bad in the 90s, right? Like, I took as a cultural studies minor in college, and we talked about this in the early 2000s, mid 2000s, I guess, about the big five media corporations that owned most of the media in the 90s. So, like, this is not a new problem, but again, the consolidation has gotten worse. And again, just the concentration of wealth. So Bezos can just like buy the Washington Post and regularly publish opinion pieces about how taxing billionaires is bad. Like, can have union workers arrested, or not even union workers, people who are trying to unionize at Amazon arrested while funding the Met Gala so that he can feel like he's loved. He's not. So what happens, right? We have people who are performing belief. Some of those people do actually come to believe those things. Again, I tend to think the current administration, the current regime here in America is mostly sycophants and not true believers. I think somebody like Pete Hegseth is very stupid and probably has brain damage, but also might be a true believer in like the wartime Christian propaganda stuff. Mike Johnson's harder to tell. I don't think I just think he's so much better at pretending to be a true believer. But like, again, Trump is just a grifter. He's just a con man, who's deep into dementia. JD Vance, again, I think is performing. I don't think he believes much of it at all. So, not great. And this has happened before, right? So Soviet propaganda fell apart, but like slowly, right? That's my point here. And I do tend to go back to historical precedent because human beings have evolved over time and do change, but kind of slowly. And again, like, the thing with the internet, it opened a lot of doors that didn't exist before. People's access to knowledge, people's potential to connect. And then the same sort of stuff happened with like propaganda and the concentration of wealth. Like, that's the human piece of it, right? We're not talking about innovation and all these other things. Uber disrupting public transportation. Like, no, it didn't. Streaming disrupting the cable industry. No, it didn't. These things are just other people want to be in power, not that they're actually interested in not even reforming, let alone revolutionizing some of these industries. So some of that stuff hasn't really gone anywhere in our lifetimes, outside of the access to information, which I do think is huge, which is why these incredibly wealthy people keep fighting against it and buying up chunks of access to the internet, is why right-wingers, always with security, always with safety, right? Taking away your rights under the guise of safety, are pushing for like age verification bills, because like they don't want people to have free access to the internet. They certainly don't want it to be free, and they don't want it to be not propagandized, right? These totalitarian governments always have tried to control the arts, tried to control publication, tried to control the flow of information, because that's necessary for propaganda. You can't let dissent exist, which is wildly at odds with the propaganda of America, which, again, the people who cry free speech the most are the ones who are trying to take it away for other people. So, but what happens, right? Well, with Mao in China, like, famine happens, right? And at some point, there is no amount of propaganda. There is no amount of performing belief in spite of your cognitive dissonance that will overcome. People don't have enough to eat, right? And like, yeah, millions of people died really bad. The Soviet Union, right? Corruption, story of most humanity, right? Again, like, I think there are other movements. I think both socialism and communism are better than capitalism. And without the correct safeguards in place, bad people, bad faith actors, corrupt politicians will still ruin what could be otherwise a functional system. But again, that concentration of power, regardless of what we're calling it, whatever ism we're attaching to it as an ethos, doesn't really matter if power gets concentrated. So the realities there are what broke the propaganda. Now, did the propaganda fire back up? Like, yeah, Mao very specifically had not just propaganda for his regime, but then he started a secondary propaganda for what went wrong with the first propaganda. The Soviet Union, I did if you're listening to the podcast and didn't know I had a YouTube channel, this is my second plug of the YouTube channel. How unbearable for myself. I really hate talking about myself, but I did a review of the HBO miniseries Chernobyl, and I think that was really good. And I talked about a lot of stuff there about like cognitive dissonance and what state-sponsored propaganda can do to people, and when it fails. Like the Chernobyl accident was a really good example of like, yeah, this was a problem. This was Gorbachev says Chernobyl was a turning point where people not only were like distrusting of the government and especially like the KGB and like the propaganda associated there, but also like it fell flat on its face in front of a world audience. And yeah, I mean, there was like pride and civil duty in the people who worked to keep that disaster from getting worse, which the show did a nice job of showing. But it was people, not propaganda. And so, the waning power with those things shows through. I think what is going to happen with hopefully the best possible outcome is conservatism in America goes away under the Republican heading, and the Democratic Party shifts into an actual progressive party and then splits off into a center-right conservative party, which is what it currently is. I don't think that'll happen. That seems unlikely. I hope to be wrong because, again, I also didn't think Trump would win a second election. So I tend not to prognosticate on politics because it's not a thing I've studied a ton. I have studied mental health a ton, and I know that people change slowly over time. So again, I don't think the ideal would happen because I feel like that's too big of a shift. But what's the reality right now? Things suck. Gas prices are obliterating people and will get worse as stockpiles run short and climate change continues to be a problem, right? Not just because of the Iran war, but like the Iran war will be the thing that dictates a huge shift in the midterms. Even with all the fuckery, I still fully expect the Republican Party to pull between now and then, like canceling primaries and redrawing maps. People are mad because stuff's too expensive. As restrictions and regulations roll back on companies, they don't make better choices. They just extract wealth from the average person and run away, hopefully before the problems get too bad. So like we do need to hold big oil executives to account. We do need to hold these tech people to account. Again, the idea that like on X, I don't know if this is still true or not, but there really hasn't been a ton of accountability for Elon Musk for letting Grok AI, his AI, make a ton of child sexual abuse material. And like that's bad. Like we've failed as a civilization if we're not protecting children, if we're not feeding and housing children. We're bad. We're bad. That's bad. We as a species are doing it wrong. As somebody who's, millennially firmly into my bird watching phase, like watching the birds, we've got a nest on our garage. It's really exciting, waiting for those eggs to hatch. And yeah, the bird feeders are out. May Day happens. Put your bird feeders out. Watch the animals. Open the door and clap loudly at the squirrels that are getting into the bird feed because they really shouldn't. These squirrels are impressive. We've got squirrel resistant bird feeders and they still find a way. But again, like just watching this mother bird protect its young is like, yeah, that's hardwired into species, and the fact that we've protected billionaires instead of children doesn't speak well of us. My fandom of Malazan, Book of the Fallen, comes through here because historically societies are judged not on how wealthy the richest people lived, but how well the society did taking care of the most needy. And we suck at that here in America. And that's the reality that will pull through The question is, again, how much suffering needs to happen before that. So while I'm trying to be hopeful in this episode, the reality is like, that's going to suck. Even if we were to have a revolution, it would suck, because there's not really a pathway in America, I don't think, to revolutionize without violence. And again, I'm of the opinion like the state is enacting violence on us every day. People keep dying in ICE custody. They're like killing one person a week. Just because we don't have a video of it on the news every night doesn't mean it's not happening. And again, like, it will be horrific when it comes out, when there is finally accountability and we go in and we see how people were living and how people were treated. It will be horrific. Like, these are concentration camps. So it's going to get worse before it gets better. I do think, again, historical precedent is it will get better because the reality pokes through and does shift. But again, it's a percentage shift. It's a majority of people shift. It's not everybody shifts. We know there are people who will double down. We know there are white supremacists who still are like celebrating Hitler's birthday and finding whatever new weird corner of the internet they can get to socialize on and espouse their eugenics stuff and be, quoting RFK eugenics stuff, because not great that he's in charge of anything. Yeah, this was going to be more hopeful. I mean, the fracturing and of the party line is important, which we're having, a weird timeline when I agree with Tucker Carlson or Candace Owens, when Marjorie Taylor Greene is like a voice of reason saying like, maybe we should prosecute the pedophiles. Like, that should be a really low bar. And again, she's a grifter and she's somebody who entered government not with the good of people in mind, but for her own enrichment and just rats leaving a sinking ship. Got out. But like, yeah, like Thomas Massey is not a good person, even though he's the one who keeps pushing for the release of the Epstein files. All of his other policy stances are bad for people. But again, people are shifting. Public sentiment is shifting. The response to a lot of these AI data centers being built is wildly negative. A lot of them are being canceled. A lot of people are standing up against them. The problem is, again, like, we need institutional changes. Propaganda is failing. Not enough yet. I don't think it's hit the tipping point that it needs to. But it will. And because reality wins out and the corporate overlords will protect themselves, and that will be shifting the public line on what hits the news every single night, as approved by the Sinclair Broadcasting Corporation, which is a huge monopoly for like your local news sources. So the fracturing matters, and we're seeing the crumbling of that. What will come out, again, will probably be too late for somebody like Trump. Like, his brain's pretty deteriorated, and I would love to see him go to jail before he perishes from old age, natural causes. But for what accountability will look like for the other corruption, the younger Trumps, the Pete Hegseths of the world, like Hegseth is committing war crimes on the regular. So, we need accountability for stuff like that. Do I feel like public perception is there? No, not really. I'm sort of in a leftist echo chamber. I'm not unaware of that. So sure, in the people I talk to and the things I listen to, is there the push for accountability? Yes. Ken Jennings put something on Blue Sky one day about like whoever is pushing for prosecuting this current regime will get his vote. Like, is Ken Jennings, I mean, he's the new Alex Trebek. Does he hold the sway that Alex Trebek did? No, because again, like, our culture has fractured. Again, with one of those things with just the internet, like, it's harder for people to hold as big a percentage of the culture's mind as it used to. That's even true for politicians, right? But people don't get their sources of information from the same place. Media is fractured, but then unfortunately within those fractures, it tends to be more extreme. We're living in a time of extremism as opposed to shared reality, which is a problem. And again, like, reality will win out. People will be harmed along the way, which is a bummer. Got caught up in my microphone. People will be harmed along the way, which is a bummer. And, propaganda that is currently shaping not just perception, but is definitely shaping policy will take a while to be undone. We haven't undone all the harm the Reagan administration did yet. And like Trump's doubling, tripling down on it in some cases. So while I do find history to be helpful, one of the other things that I do, and again, you gotta check in with yourself. You have to be realistic about whether this works for you and whether this is helpful or not. But again, like, part of the historical reference point isn't just studying history, but it's studying what the culture was putting out at the time. And so, reading George Orwell, understanding 1984 and Animal Farm, even something like V for Vendetta, right? And then its worse, but more recent movie version talks about like fascism is bad and how do people resist and what happens when the propaganda crumbles. A more modern and perhaps nuanced, because it's still going on, take would be like James Tynion's Department of Truth, in that reality is shaped, and like this is a thing Tynion writes about a lot. Reality is shaped by belief. But again, I mean, that's not necessarily a new concept. Other authors have done it. I think like American Gods is very much about that. Not that I want to put Neil Gaiman on a pedestal or reference him currently. Why are such bad people in charge of things? So yeah, I mean, if studying history is not the landing place for you, then like, again, participating is the wrong word. Reading, enjoying, engaging with some of the cultural moments from those things. Listen to old protest songs because it will make you feel connected to people in the past. Could it be sort of a bummer to be like, wow, this old song is still oddly relevant today? Sure, I'm a huge Pink Floyd fan. Like, listening to The Wall is a bit of a bummer that what was getting called out in the 80s still being performed today by Roger Waters and is still relevant. I said happy. Star Wars is about empire is bad. Imperialism is bad. And what are we doing? We had to make Andor be relevant because people weren't getting it. People who think Star Wars is cool, like fucking Elon Musk being like, you understood it in Star Wars, why don't you understand it now, when he was in Doge? And like the top comments were like, never was the richest person in the Star Wars universe a good guy. Yeah, again, I think the propaganda is propped up by wealth inequality more than public perception, but we need just a little bit more on that public perception, which is happening, right? Because the propaganda can't poke through everything's great, everything's cheap, the price of eggs when filling up your gas tank is such a problem. And again, like, gas in America is probably a larger problem than eggs are, because we have no backup. Trump has spent millions, if not billions of dollars canceling wind and nuclear projects, going out of his way to dismantle them, not just interrupt them or slow them. So again, letting somebody who has bankrupted multiple casinos be in charge of stuff was always a bad idea. But we have no public transport infrastructure. There is nothing for people to do. Gas prices go up, so you're driving across country to see your friends and family for the 4th of July, and you're pissed about how much it costs because you're not going to fly, because that's going to be even more expensive. So there's a reality that can't be outrun here. Again, I think the Iran war and the illegal military action in Iran and the way that systems change, like, we're, I think, close to a tipping point, I think it will tip and allow institutions that are currently part of the problem to persist. Again, I don't think we're going to be at revolutionary point. I think we'll be at reform, which is better than barreling towards annihilation, but is not as good as it could be. And like, again, that generally means progress over time, over a long enough space. But like, we really do probably need revolution. Humans are speed running their own extinction. So it's not good. So, but as just voting out Trump probably won't be enough. Will somebody else be able to fix gas prices right away? No. So will more people be interested in green and renewable energies? Hopefully, yes. Right. I'm not doom and gloom about it, but I do think grounding in historical precedent and setting realistic expectations. This is not, just give it time. It's not something that like time heals all wounds. That's always been a bad cliche. Healing takes time, and there's an active process to healing, right? You do your exercises, you go to PT, you do whatever it is, you take your medicine. Like it doesn't work immediately, and it does work over time. So it's time and effort. And so, organizing, building community, being engaged with some of this stuff is important work to do right now, but it's a marathon, not a sprint. And we want it to be better for ourselves. Certainly, millennials have sort of been shafted by a lot of cultural swings. Fuck off, boomers. But also, like, yeah, I mean, it'd be cool if the level of animals going extinct on a yearly basis dropped down so that my kids can enjoy nature when they're older. That'd be fun, right? That'd be fun. So, yeah, belief systems for everyone will not shift with reality, but reality will break the propaganda at some point. There is a tipping point, probably sooner rather than later. What comes of that is our work, right? Like that's the work right now to push for a more, I'm going to say leftist, but if that makes you uncomfortable, a more egalitarian society, a society that is geared towards the benefit of future generations and also aware that like the world is a limited resource and we need to take better care of it, and that will benefit future generations as well. So, vote for the leftist leaning person you can. If you're in a position to burn down a warehouse, I can't tell you to do that on a public podcast. Don't do that. If you're in a position to stand against the violence that is currently being enacted by the state, then yeah, let's do that too. Because not having an answer to the violence that's going on a daily basis won't solve the problem. And so, that happens. Historical precedent on that is there is violence, whether it's property destruction, and there's violent responses from the state, and in organizing and building community, that can be mitigated, but not eliminated. So people will be hurt in this process because the powers that be are already enacting violence. It doesn't bother them. It doesn't stop them. So we need to push for people who have a better idea than just we want to keep the violence intact, but we want better people doing the violence. Like that can't be the solution. So yeah, organize and put pressure on the people who are already elected, and then elect better people further and further left, and people who are looking at a global scale, not a national scale, because the reality is those borders are just made up. They don't matter. So yeah, cool. Happy episode. I'm laughing, so that's good, right? It's a momentary joy. No, I mean, again, this is stuff that I think people are really struggling with, and I think looking at the historical precedent matters, and then finding actionable items you can do matter. But like marathon, not a sprint, is all about resource management. Like this isn't there are multiple crises going on. We're living in a time of the polycrisis. Like, you, an individual, can't change that, which is why organizing and having action in your own personal life matters, and also resourcing yourself and taking care of yourself, because these changes will take time. And it's not a like let time heal it itself. It's not a sit back and let other people do the work. Like, do the work and take care of yourself. So, don't be the meme. Don't be the person in the meme who isn't doing shit after everybody else says, I'm doing my part. Find your part and do that and take care of yourself. And then take care of someone else, because that's how we build community. Okay. I am in my stage of thinking about the guests that I have, which is like a long list at this point. So we will get back on track. I don't know if it'll happen this month or next month or what. But my process is usually a few weeks of warming myself up before having to email people out of the blue. That's the thing I don't like. I just don't like scheduling. I don't like the cold calling of it. So, my introvert side wins out more often than my extrovert side. So I do have guests lined up. We'll get to it. I've got some cool stuff to talk about over the summer, for later in the summer too. So come on back next week for another new episode. See you then.